Welcome to eWay-Podcasts, podcasts from the world of CRM, business, and entrepreneurship. Today's topic is how the Pareto principle can help prepare advertising campaigns. You'll learn who Pareto was and how to use his findings to make your marketing efforts more efficient. Would you like to save energy and achieve better results at the same time? Let's get started. You may have heard about the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule before. What Pareto basically says is that 20% of the causes are responsible for 80% of the results. Simply put, 20% of your time and efforts generate 80% of your output. But what should you do about this? Vilfredo Pareto was an Italian economist who lived at the turn of the 19th century. During his research, he found that 4/5 of national wealth was generated by about 1/5 of the population, which was a mere fraction of the economically active people. He also realized that the same rate applied to land ownership. 20% of landowners owned 80% of the cultivated land. Moreover, Pareto tried to apply this ratio to neighboring countries and ended up with the same outcome. Needless to say, Pareto was quite surprised by the result of his research. Today, we'll put Pareto's findings to use. We'll start by listing some general examples, and then we'll focus on marketing communication. In the next 3 parts of this podcast, we'll touch on the topic of business, websites, and overall content marketing. In each of those parts, we'll also explain how to work with the 80-20 rule to achieve better results for your company. Let's get to it. People say that it was a bed of pea that drew Pareto's attention to the 80-20 rule. Apparently, 20% of the pea plants generated 80% of the pea harvest. And Pareto didn't stop at the pea discovery. He tried to examine the heart of the matter. Let's talk about his business examples. Pareto found that 20% of salespeople brought 80% of profits to the company, or that employees get 80% of their work done within 20% of their working time. And last but not least, Pareto realized that 20% of your customers buy 80% of your goods. Of course, one can apply the Pareto principle the other way around. We can say that software developers spend 80% of their time on features that make up only 20% of the resulting computer program, or that 20% of dangerous areas are responsible for 80% of work-related accidents. And finally, according to the same principle, 20% of your employees make 80% of sick leaves. These are just some examples of the Pareto principle applied in real life. Yes, we would find many more, but you get the idea. Now let's turn our attention to the marketing field. It was marketing strategist Perry Marshall who introduced the Pareto principle to the field of marketing. Marshall worked some more on the 80-20 rule, focusing directly on the crucial 20%. His mind map went like this. If 20% of customers bring 80% of profits, then we can continue digging further. By the same logic, 20% of those 20% of customers should generate 80% of the 80% profit. According to Marshall, we can continue doing this forever. 20% from 20% from 20% from 20% from... The more significant the sample is, the further we get. Try to apply this theory to your data. You might as well find where the biggest portion of your revenue comes from. Now, it's time to put that theory to use in real life. How can the Pareto principle help with your marketing communication? You can take advantage of the 80-20 rule when planning advertising campaigns, creating web content, or making posts for social networks. That's why we'll now focus on 3 marketing areas and analyze each of them. The first part is all about the business. And in the second part, we'll talk about the website. And in the last third part, we'll focus on content as such. The first part, business. The Pareto principle applies to business activities in many ways, but we'll focus on 3 specific statements about customers, products, and warranty claims. Let's start from the beginning. "80% of profits are generated by 20% of customers." Imagine that you're a florist and that you sell your 10 flowers to 10 different customers daily. Two of these customers buy 4 flowers each, meaning they buy 8 out of your 10 flowers. We consider this statement one of Pareto's key findings, and the good news is that you can easily see if this applies to your business. If most of your profits come from a fifth of your customers, then it does. In that case, you should try to identify those customers and take excellent care of them. And when you get to know this type of customer, you can try and reach out to similar businesses. Who knows, maybe you'll land a new profitable client. Keep an eye on the distribution channels your key customers use and create attractive advertising messages for them. Work with relevant media channels and make the content interesting to these essential 20% of your customers. It's vital to know your clients. Don't hesitate to perform demographic and psychological surveys. The better you know your most important customers, the more effectively you'll communicate with them. You don't have to try communicating with all your customers. Stop wasting your time and money. Not all customers are worth your special attention. Concentrate on the 20% that bring you the most revenue. %80 of online sales have to do with 20% of products. Again, imagine you're a florist and you have 10 different kinds of flowers in your shop. One day you do the math and see that only 2 types of flowers sell the most, roses and tulips. Maybe it's time to get rid of orchids. You can apply the Pareto rule to your business if about 20% of your products or services make up the majority of your revenue. Do you have a specific product group that sells best? Then you should promote it as much as possible. Use this information and focus on your profitable goods. These products or services didn't just happen to be so successful, so it's advisable to pay them maximum attention and care, and perhaps get inspired by them and create another business opportunity. %80 of complaints come from 20% of customers. Let's demonstrate this statement with an example. Again, you're a florist and serve 10 customers a day. 2 of those customers come back to your shop 8 times a day and complain about the flowers they purchased. We have already explained that you can figure out which 20% of your customers are the most profitable. Just as you can identify the 20% of your customers that bring you the most joy, you can also identify the 20% who bring you the most trouble. We're referring to those clients who constantly dial your info line, complain about every step you take, and have a huge problem with everything you say. You often know them by name, even if you've never seen them in your life. Sometimes it crosses your mind that you would rather lose them as your customers. Just a few such troublemakers can easily block 80% of your customer support time. Remember them when you prepare your client service strategy and try to make sure they're worth the trouble. In the first part of the Pareto principle in marketing, we talked about business. We have listed the 3 most important rules. The first one, 20% of customers generate 80% of profits. The second one, 20% of products make 80% of online sales. And the third one, 80% of complaints come from 20% of customers. Now, how do we apply the Pareto principle to the website? The second part, websites. If Pareto were alive today, he would undoubtedly have a good time examining websites. Let's see 4 inspiring examples of the Pareto principle that come to mind when talking about sites. %80 of conversions come from 20% of the website content. Let's see an example. As a florist, you have an e-shop consisting of 10 pages. However, only 2 of those really convince people to actually buy flowers. You know how it goes. The visitor clicks through your website, and then there's the holy grail, a contact form, a buy now button, or get a consultation link. Click. But did you know that this magic formula that turns a visitor into a customer works in 8 out of 10 cases on just 20% of your website? Focus on these 20% of your top performing sites and optimize your conversion rate. The better you tweak these sites, the more goals you achieve, whether it's completing a purchase on your e-shop, downloading the content, or arranging a meeting with your sales representative. 80% of visitors get to the website from only 20% of possible sources. Let's demonstrate this statement with an example. You're a florist with your very own e-shop, and out of 10 visits a day, 8 visitors get to your site via a click from your business Facebook page. Visitors reach your website through search engines, ads on other sites, social media, by directly entering a web address, and many different ways. If you don't know where your visitors come from, you better start finding out. Use Google Analytics to quickly identify channels that drive the most traffic to your website. According to the Pareto principle, there's only 20% of valid sources. Focus on them, develop them, and bring even more people to your website. "80% of visitors come to your website due to 20% of the keywords." Again, here's an example. You're a florist with an e-shop where you use a set of 10 keywords. However, only 2 of them, fresh flowers and buy a flower, bring 8 out of 10 visitors to your website. Is SEO, search engine optimization, your mantra? You won't rest until you've invented the whole set of perfect keywords? If you spend your days creating SEO strategies and thinking of their applications on your site, we don't have good news for you. According to the Pareto principle, 80% of the keywords you use don't work anyway. Ask any online advertising experts, and they'll tell you that the resulting ratio is, in fact, even lower. Interpret Google Analytics and SEMrush carefully. Use these tools to learn what aspects of online communication are important to your business. See what the visitors to your website are searching for. Then you'll be able to offer them as much original content as possible and on the exact topics that interest them. "80% of sales are driven by 20% of advertising tools." Think of this example. As a florist with an e-shop, you invest in 10 different marketing channels like PPC ads, magazine ads, TV ads, and so on. After a while, you'll probably see that only 2 channels cause 8 out of 10 completed orders. When talking about ad channels that work on your site, you're likely to think of AdWords, retargeting, and banners promoting discounts. Do you use any of them? You can quickly identify which ads generate the most sales or deliver the necessary leads just by using the right analytics tools. Pay close attention to advertisements that work. Keep in mind that 20% of your advertising delivers 80% of your sales, and advertising investment must pay off in revenue. You just found out how the Pareto principle applies to a website. Let's summarize the most important statements. 80% of conversions come from 20% of the website content. 80% of visitors get to the website from only 20% of possible sources. 80% of visitors come to your website due to 20% of the keywords. 80% of sales are driven by 20% of advertising tools. Try to think about it for a minute and see if these statements apply to your website. You would save a lot of time and money just by focusing on those 20% that affect the resulting 80%. Are you now looking forward to seeing how the Pareto principle works when applied to marketing content? The third part, the content. We have already talked about the Pareto principle in terms of business and websites. In the last part of this podcast, we'll turn our attention to the content. Here are the most effective 2 rules. "80% of leads come from 20% of the content." Let's see an example of this statement. There's a blog section on your florist e-shop. You write 10 articles each month giving tips on arranging flowers. You'll probably see that only 2 of these 10 articles attract 8 out of 10 potential customers. No one seems to doubt the power of content marketing today. The whole point is to know what content generates the necessary marketing leads for you. According to the Pareto principle, only 1/5 of the created content brings the most future and current customers. It doesn't matter what the content is. We could be talking about a well-written manual, infographics, or a yearbook. You'll often realize that one well-written blog article is responsible for a large number of website visits. We don't need to tell you that it's essential to update such materials, reuse them, even transform them into other forms. If you have such a hero piece of content, try turning it into a podcast, ebook, or other marketing material. "80% of shared content consists of about 20% of posts." Here's the example. You have your business Facebook page promoting your florist eShop. Let's say you publish 10 posts a month on this Facebook page. Now you can see that only 2 of the 10 are liked and shared the most. Try to think about your activity on social media. Where do all the likes and shares come from? You can bet that your followers seem to love just a fifth of your posts. Try using analytics tools to determine what they have in common. If you find out, congratulations, you can use this knowledge when creating new posts. Oh yes, you can apply the Pareto principle even in the field of content marketing. And what again are the 2 most important statements we mentioned? 80% of leads come from 20% of the content, and 80% of the shared content consists of about 20% of posts. Today, we're talking a lot about mathematics, but at least the only ratio you need to count on is 80-20. We also made a trip to the past and learned about Pareto's research. Then we started to put those ideas to practice and applied the Pareto principle to nowadays marketing. Finally, we ended up with several ways of how to use the Pareto principle or 80-20 rule in business, website, and content marketing. There's only one thing left to say. Always remember that nothing is 100% true, and the Pareto principle is not any given law. The 80-20 rule makes sense, but only under certain conditions, and sometimes it simply doesn't work. While it may be useful for interpreting customer data, always consider whether it fits your business. You have been listening to an eWay-Podcast. The article was written by Jan Brichta, spoken by Cliff Coma. For more inspirational audio records, please visit our blog at blog.eway-crm.com, podcast section.